Our government sucks. It can't stop deficit spending. It can't secure its borders. Companies aren't paying taxes and the government does nothing. The US has an enormous national debt and runs huge trade deficits with several countries. All of this has been happening for decades. Nothing's ever done. Why does our government suck? Reason number one, the executive branch is useless. Our executive branch sucks. It's horrible at enforcing the law. It takes the FDA an average of 8 years to approve a drug. It takes months for veterans to get a medical appointment at VA hospitals. It takes years, sometimes decades, for the federal government to deport illegal immigrants. The average IRS audit happens 4 years after the tax return was filed. Fewer than 1% of all criminal prosecutions in the US are commenced by federal prosecutors. There is widespread fraud in our welfare programs that is rarely investigated or prosecuted. The same could be said of our bankruptcy system. Why does the executive branch suck so much? Most countries do a far better job. It also didn't used to be like this in the US. The reason is simple and can be summed up in this chart. The executive branch doesn't have enough employees. How can this be? Back in 1945, the US government had around 3 million people working as federal bureaucrats. That was when our population was around 140 million people. We have nearly tripled our population, but we have lost a third of our bureaucrats in that time. Why is this? There is a despicable reason for this, which I will explain later in the video. Reason number two, Congress sucks. Congress is by far the worst branch of government. It always scores extremely low in opinion polls. This is because it is the most corrupt branch in government. All Americans agree that Congress is corrupt. For some reason, we just accept this. Most legislation that Congress passes is bought and paid for by lobbyists. Both political parties are equally guilty of this. Was it always this bad? It actually used to be the executive branch that was the most corrupt. Under the spoils system, the president would get to appoint a very large number of political supporters to public office. The decisions were not based on merit or who would be the best person for that position. Instead, they were based on politics. Most bureaucrats appointed under the spoils system were corrupt. They'd use their public office to make money rather than help other people. During the Progressive Era, the spoils system was ended. For a long time, we had a high-quality government that was not overly corrupt. Unfortunately, the spoils system has returned to the government. This time it is Congress who hands out the spoils, not the executive branch. Lobbyists make campaign contributions to congressmen. Congressmen then pass laws that involve transferring federal money or power to the lobbyist company. Let's say I make cell phones. Nobody buys my phones because they suck. I respond to the market's rejection by donating a bunch of campaign contributions to various congressmen. In return, they pass a law authorizing taxpayer money to pay for these phones. I agree I will provide these phones for free to low-income Americans. In addition to my profits from Congress, I also charge people for text messages and overages. Therefore, I can make money off of what essentially is a government program. Of course, this system sucks for taxpayers. Maybe it is worthwhile to give poor people free phones. I don't know. But if government is going to do this, it should get the profits, not some private company. Unfortunately for us, the most corrupt branch of government is the branch that manages the federal budget. Reason number three, Congress is by far the most powerful branch of government. The founding fathers wanted our country to have divided powers and checks and balances. In our current situation, Congress is by far the most powerful branch. How so? Well, first of all, Congress has used its power over the budget to prevent the executive branch from hiring any new employees. This keeps the executive branch weak and powerless to do anything without the assistance of Congress. The president cannot accomplish any goals on his own due to his lack of bureaucrats. If a president wants to accomplish something, he's forced to beg for help from Congress. This is exactly how Congress wants the system to work. They make money every time there is legislation passed. A complete lack of executive employees also allows Congress to pass government projects on to unaccountable private companies. These companies can get paid directly with taxpayer money. They can also use their governmental power given to them by Congress to make money. In the current system, Congress passes large omnibus bills that are thousands of pages long, and nobody in Congress actually reads them. The contents of these bills are basically a list of what companies are getting what taxpayer spoils. But wait, you might be thinking, can't the president just simply veto this type of corrupt legislation? Nope. Congress has found a way around that as well. One of the most despicable power grabs in our country's history took place when Congress tied funding for the executive and judicial branches of government with passing its legislation. These days, if a president vetoes a bill from Congress, the government is likely to shut down. Because of this, George W. Bush and Barack Obama both vetoed only 12 pieces of legislation. Trump has not vetoed even one. If he were to have done so at any point, the entire executive branch would have lost all funding and shut down. Reason number 4. The judicial branch only restrains the executive. What about the judicial branch? Well, I would describe our government in the following way. While Congress goes out and parties, it keeps the starving executive branch locked inside its basement. The judicial branch serves as a sort of guard for Congress and makes sure the executive doesn't leave the basement. Congress pretty much gets to do anything it wants. Sure, the judicial branch could, in theory, find a law passed by Congress unconstitutional. This hypothetical, though, would require Congress to actually pass a real law. Most of what Congress does these days is hand out spoils. Congress gives contracts and taxpayer money to various companies and individuals who buy those benefits. The executive branch is treated much differently. Anytime the executive branch tries to do something that a company or an interest group does not like, they file a lawsuit and a preliminary injunction gets put in place stopping the federal government from acting. These lawsuits not only freeze the executive from acting, but they use up its extremely limited resources. For example, let's say the president is concerned that certain people who are receiving food stamps are deliberately not working. So the president tells the Department of Agriculture to adopt a policy requiring recipients to provide proof they are looking for a job. Well, I guarantee you this would result in a lawsuit. Now let's flip this situation. Suppose I am a taxpayer. I see Congress is proposing a food stamp bill. I fear that if it passes, my taxpayer dollars are going to go to lazy people who refuse to work. I also believe the reason Congress is passing this is actually due to lobbying from agriculture business. I cannot file a lawsuit against Congress stopping them from passing this bill. The judicial branch is useless to me in stopping this. Here is another example. Suppose the Department of Energy wants to place regulations on how much carbon dioxide certain manufacturing plants produce. The Department of Energy might want to do this to help prevent global warming. If they pass such a regulation, there will be a lawsuit and preliminary injunction challenging the executive branch's authority. Now let's contrast this with Congress. Let's say Congress wants to create a carbon stock exchange. This is a real thing that's been proposed. This exchange would be privately run and would cap the amount of carbon allowed to be produced, and it would let companies trade in carbon credits. The exchange itself would be allowed to profit off these trades. It would be very difficult for anyone opposed to something like this to file a lawsuit against Congress that would prevent Congress from doing this. The judicial branch is only really able to restrain the executive branch. Reason number 5, Congress is the least accountable branch of government. We've established Congress as the most powerful branch. The executive branch can't check their power. The judicial branch generally can't as well. What about voters? We can vote them out of office, right? Well, here's the problem. Congress has a poor reputation amongst voters. Voters consistently rate Congress more poorly than the other two branches. Yet incumbency, or when a congressperson running for office is already in office, gives a huge advantage. 90% of congressmen are reelected. People hate Congress, yet they keep voting for the same congressman. Ask yourself this. You may know whether your congressman voted for the omnibus spending bill or for the Obamacare bill several years ago. If you know this, I'd say you are already better informed than the vast majority of voters. However, do you know which congressman added which amendments to the bill? If not, are you willing to spend the hours of time necessary to conduct this research to identify which specific congressmen put what specific corrupt provisions in it? Even amongst voters who closely follow elections, this is simply too much work to ask of most people. Most Americans would not be able to provide an accurate description of what their congressmen are actually doing in Congress. Compare this with the presidential election. The presidential election is closely covered in the news media. Both parties conduct a series of debates leading up to the primaries. The debates generally have high television ratings. A lot of issues and policy differences are discussed. The primaries happen over a series of several months. Candidates receive lots of media attention. Then in the general election, there are even more debates. There's a lot of media coverage and transparency. Whoever emerges from this might not be well liked by the voters. But I guarantee you that that person who emerges as the president at some point took stances on political issues that were popular enough that people consistently voted for them. This candidate will then take over the executive branch and will quickly realize he's completely and utterly useless. Thanks for watching my video. If you liked it, please subscribe.